Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Brick by Brick. We have with us Gautam Saraogi, founder and CEO of Go Colors. It's a brand that's gone on to become a defining brand in women's bottom wear. Started in 2010, the brand scaled extremely well in a capital efficient manner and had its listing in 2021. As of Q1 this financial year, the brand was at about 800 crores annualized revenues with a 30 plus percentage EBITDA margin. The numbers are quite stunning, to be honest. A brand spend of less than 5 crores when you are at 400 crores and discounted sale of less than 3% as a percentage of revenues. These are unbelievable numbers, given we look at brands all the time. So it is a phenomenal story of a business built on strong fundamentals and with a razor sharp focus on just one category. So Gautam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Hari. Thanks. Nice to.
Let's start with the initial days. How did you pick this category, and how did you think about differentiating the brand versus whatever was available in the market?
Yeah, so see, I think we started the business in 2010. And at that point of time, we wanted to do something in retail. I mean, see, we ran the garment export business for a very long time. And exports at that point of time was going through a tough time during the 2010, 2009 window. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to do something in retail. And obviously, because we had a garment export background, so we wanted to do something in garments only. So we studied menswear, women's wear, kids wear. And interestingly, in women's wear, we saw that there was a very big shift happening in the women's attire. It was moving from the sari market to the two-piece separates market, where bottom wear was selling in huge numbers and it was largely unorganized. In top wear, there were good enough number of players, but in bottom wear, there were none. So that's how we selected this niche in women's wear, and we started Go Colors in 2010.
Right. And I think in terms of the channel that you picked, you initially started with general trade and quickly pivoted to a kiosk and EBO-led channel approach. So could you, share the reason why you started with GT and why you pivoted? You had to pivot to a kiosk and EBO-led model?
See, I think, look, what happened, at that point of time, online didn't exist. In 2010, 2011, when we started, online was just about to start, but it was not of that importance in the retail scheme of things. And so there was either you were in GT or you were in large format stores or you were there in EBO. These were the three channels that existed at that point of time. So large format stores, we didn't get an entry because we were not a brand, we were a label as such, right? Brand is something which gets built over a period of time where there's a trust element in front of the customer, in the eyes of the customer. So we're just a label. So LFS did not give us the space because there was no recall for Go Colors. And so we started with general trade because general trade was the largest retail unorganized market. So we started with general trade. Very soon we realized that in general trade, you don't control your shelf space. And when you don't control your shelf space, sustainability in that business comes down when you don't have your shelf space as your own. Because then you're dictated terms by the retailer or the distributor, and you will never earn high margins in that business because you're at the beck and call of the retailer, because the shelf space belongs to the retailer. Second issue happens in general trade is that you don't control your pricing. Today, a retailer is free to discount the product how much ever the retailer wants, unless you're a strong brand, which we weren't at that point of time. And the third issue we faced, which was the largest issue, was receivables. I think we as a brand, coming from the background of exports, we were not that familiar with collections because in exports, everything came through LCs, right? So we were coming from a different scenario altogether, and we lost a little bit of money in receivables. So we then realized that, look, if we have to sustain our business, if we want to do business, how do you do it? General trade has its challenges. LFS wouldn't give us entry. So by points of elimination, we said, okay, let's try the EBO. So we tried with the kiosk first, worked very well. Then we pivoted to the store model when our product range expanded. So one of the reasons why we went into the EBO arena was because general trade had a long list of challenges, which didn't excite us.
And this is a very pertinent pertinent topic for a lot of digital first brands that are exploring the offline channel as we speak. What would, given your experience, what would your guidance be in terms of how they should think about the various options they have in offline, GT, LFS, general trade, etc.? Because there are a lot of brands that scaled up online and are trying to figure the offline channel. So how should they be thinking about it, in the first year?
There's no one recipe for everyone. Let me put it that way. Because EBO works for us and 75% of the business might not work for someone else. I think the EBO dynamics is very different for everyone. So there's no one recipe. Let me put that this way. So for most digital first brands, when they're entering the offline arena, they first need to figure out what will work for them the best. So they need to do GT, they need to do LFS, they need to do EBO. They need to put in equal effort in the three arenas and then give it some time and then understand what works for them the best and then drive that particular model from there. See, from a profitability perspective, all three, of course, EBO has its own profitability metrics. You're selling to the consumer directly, you will have better gross margins. So EBO profitability is a little better, but it is very subjective to each brand. So my advice to anyone who's entering in the offline arena, don't get carried away by the EBO story of ours and others. You need to first actually put in seeds for all three, see what works best for you, and then scale it from there.
No, that's great advice. So, your suggestion is to try all of them, experiment, and then double down based on what's working.
Because the dynamics are very different, right? In EBO, you need to have very high repeat purchase. You need to have a frequency of purchase. So just because it's worked for someone does not mean it will work for someone else. Just because GT did not work for me does not mean GT does not work. So for everyone, the recipe is different, I would say.
Absolutely agree. So, let's go back to your journey. So in the first year, you said, you started focusing on kiosks. Now, if we take just the first 2 years of your journey, how many kiosks, EBOs did you roll out in the first 2 years?
See, I'll tell you, kiosk was an excellent step for us before we set up our stores. Probably if we would have parachuted and opened our stores directly first, I don't think we would have done the kind of numbers we did. I think the kiosk made some sort of brand relevant for us to open a store so that once a lady saw Go Colors, she entered our stores. If we didn't have the kiosk history, she might not have entered our stores. So the kiosk was a very good foundation. So we opened our first kiosk in Chennai. We experimented. We saw it. The numbers did very well. Then we opened a second, then third, then fourth, and we opened a network of 80-90 kiosks across the country. Beyond the point, the kiosks were not sustainable because our product range also from a width perspective expanded dramatically. So having so many SKUs, having it in the kiosk, we wouldn't be able to sell. Because we started off with only 2 products, the kiosk was an excellent model. So we pivoted to the store model by 2013, 2014, when our product range expanded. So that shift from kiosk to store happened during the 2013-2014 window. And by that time, we had already established about 80 to 85 kiosks. So we opened our first store, it did excellent numbers, the economics were good. So we started transitioning all our kiosks to stores. And then from there, starting our first store in 2014, we've gone 650 plus in 2023. So I would say the kiosk was a good foundation.
Got it. And, I think the key question is, I always get concerned when I see brands wanting to open, 40, 50 kiosk stores on year one, right? Year one of offline expansion. So I think what will really help is, your inputs on how one should think about pacing growth. You said you got to 85 kiosks, but that was over 3 years, right? So what would your suggestion be in terms of, till you nail down the playbook, what is the right number of, range? It could be a range of kiosks, EBOs that one should open offline.
See, there's no. So I'll tell you what it very important is. The first 3-4 months of someone opening a kiosk or a store, you need to know first your economics. You need to know your ROC. You need to know the payback period. You need to know what is the working capital at a store level. I think those important questions have to be answered before you actually decide to grow at a sonic speed. And we understood that in the beginning 1 year. See, before you start replicating a model as saying, look, I'm going to open 100 stores or 150 kiosks, you need to first have those numbers in place saying that, look, what is your average revenue you're getting from a kiosk? What is your average throughput and EBITDA? What is your working capital days in terms of inventory days at a kiosk or a store level? What is your ROC? If those make sense, then you should be looking at hyper growth. And sometimes those numbers could be skewed only for your first 2-3 kiosks because those are going to be the very good performing malls. So you need to actually average it out, saying that, okay, look, my first 2-3 kiosks are giving exponential numbers, but my average numbers are always going to be lower than my exponential numbers. So you draw out your average from your exponential numbers and then build a business plan and then say, look, these are my steady state ROC or return on capital or my payback period steady state. So your first 6 months, you try to figure out your economics before you do hyper.
Right. And, just double clicking on that, I think fully aligned in terms of nailing down the playbook. Another way to ask the same question is, and I don't want to generalize, as you said, it's very case specific, but if we take your own journey, how long did it take for you to get that confidence that you nail the playbook? Number of years, number of kiosks, EBOs, I think that'll be useful.
See, I'll tell you in hindsight, and I'll be very brutally honest. I mean, you might not be looking for that answer. I'll anyways put it out there. I didn't know what was ROC. I didn't know what was sales per square feet. When I started opening the kiosk model, I was just looking at rent to revenue ratio. And when I saw that my rent to revenue ratio was on par with the industry, I knew that the business model was working. I didn't know my store level EBITDA also. I didn't know my gross margins when I was opening the kiosk. We were that naive. I knew rent to revenue. So I knew, okay, I'm in the rent to revenue of 15%. I'm doing something right. And if I'm having a 15% rent to revenue, that means I'm delivering good store level profit. So I hit that very early in my starting kiosks. So when I knew I was not losing money and I was having a very healthy rent to revenue, I just multiplied it. So I think if for an entrepreneur, when they're going into the EBO model, very, very important is what is going to be your rent to sales ratio. That is the most basic hygiene. Second level comes gross margin. Because if you're discounting very heavy, your gross margins are low. So even if your rent to revenue ratio is intact, your store will not earn money. But your first step of hygiene, what you really need to check is the rent to sales ratio. And I went on that benchmark. Now, good thing what was in our business is ours is a full price sales ratio business. So for me, that was a blessing in disguise that I used only rent to revenue as a metric and it worked forward for me. But for most brands in the universe, if you have your rent to sales ratio covered and you have good gross margins of more than 60% in your EBO business, after discounting, you're fine. Should be fine.
Got it. No, you already covered, the two most important metrics. I think
when we opened our first kiosk in 2011, we probably in the first 1 year went to about 20 kiosks. And the second year, we grew another 30-40 kiosks. So by 2014, we were about 50 kiosks and we were on track to touch about 80 kiosks. So we did in the first year, we did about 20 kiosks, to answer your question.
Got it. And what would be the same number for EBOs in the first 2 years? First 2 years of launching EBOs?
Well, I opened my first store in 2014. I went ahead. So I think by the end of 2015, we were about 20 stores.
Okay. So 20 stores in 2 years.
2 years.
Got it.
Once when we saw the metric, the numbers, I think it just clicked and we just then went very fast after that.
Got it. Now, you already touched on, gross margins and rent to revenues, two important metrics, and you gave some benchmarks as well. The other important one obviously is payback. So how do you, sort of think about, the benchmark in terms of capex and inventory payback in stores? What's like the zone you want to be in?
See, I think, look, if you're having healthy store level EBITDA, then your payback is taken care of. So I think.
And what's the healthy EBITDA margin at a store
See,
level?
anything above north of 20% or 25%, anything above 25 and above is a very good period. So I think, look, how do you calculate your payback, right? You're having your capital employed and your EBITDA. So if you control your capital employed and have healthy EBITDA, you have good payback. So anything above 25% EBITDA, very good EBITDA. And if your inventory, so capex is capex, right? I mean, that does not vary from brand to brand. Your other part of your capital employed is your inventory. So if you're having adequate inventory at your store level, so your capital employed will be under control from a working capital perspective. So if you're having adequate inventory and not high inventory and having good throughput on EBITDA of more than 25%, you will definitely have a payback period of 24 months.
Right.
So
yeah, it's just that
it's two sides of a coin,
the
right?
other variable is on capex, where sometimes.
But capex is fixed. I mean, look,
Sorry, please.
Yeah, am I audible now?
You are. Please complete. I think there was a net issue.
Okay. So see, I'm saying capex is capex. It will, for a brand, they will have to spend 3,000-4,000 rupees per square foot. In a vanilla type of small store, they would have to spend 3,000-4,000 square foot. So there's nothing really to save there. So the real question comes down to what you're keeping at a store and what is your EBITDA, what you're generating at a store level. If you're generating 25% EBITDA and you're having adequate amount of inventory, what you should be having, which can range from 45 days to 60 days of inventory, then you're in a good position.
Got it. What I meant to say was, sometimes brands also go overboard in terms of capex spend. So it's important to keep that in check as well. But broadly, the point taken.
I'll tell you one thing. You cannot fundamentally go wrong with capex. You can go 20% wrong or 15% wrong. So I think I'll tell you what. I think it's good to do good capex. It's your visual element of your store. That's your makeup of your store. It's a one-time cost. Even if you do 20% higher to make your store look better, do it. I am telling you, brands go higher on capex. It's not a big deal. In our type of format, I'm trying to tell you. See, I mean, look, you can open a 10,000 square feet and spend crazy amount of money. I'm not trying to tell you to go to one extreme. But stores that open in our format, I think it's good to spend very good in capex. That is what your customer is going to see and enter your store. And it's a one-time cost. It's not a working capital. It's a one-time cost, which your profitability pays back. Even if it means that your payback period extends by 3 months or 4 months, let it be. No problem. But that's the marketing element of your store. So I don't think you should cut down on capex. Spend adequately, spend the right amount. Don't go to one extreme where you're going really overboard and spending 8,000 rupees per square foot is not what I'm trying to say. Spend good amount of money on capex.
No, that's an interesting.
That's the makeup of your store.
No, that's an interesting perspective. The other question I had on EBOs and kiosks was, how do you think about, when you take a call on shutting down stores? How long do you give them before you decide, whether to shut down or not?
See, you have to be ruthless. I mean, look, if you will know within the first 6 months whether it's going to work or not. So you give it to a year. See, I'll tell you fundamentally, if you are negative EBITDA 30%, and that's a huge amount, the store will never. See, there are certain things where you can gauge that over a period of time, I will reach break even and then get into profitability. When a store is a disaster, you will know within the first 6 months whether it will work or not. Then you don't have to wait. So when you're minus 20 or minus 30%, then that store will never work. So within the first, so I think usually we give it about a year. we see what is the monthly loss in absolute terms and then decide. Suppose a store is losing 70,000-80,000 rupees a month. Subjective, but again, I'm trying to. I'll pursue with the store. I'll say, look, in an absolute 70,000-80,000 rupees per month in terms of percentages will look misleading, but in absolute terms, it's manageable. I'll keep the store running. Maybe it reaches break even. Now, if a store is going to lose 2 lakh rupees a month, I know whatever I do, by vintage also, I will not get to break even. So within a year, I take a call. You have to see the app, not get misled by the percentages, but seeing the absolute EBITDA loss a year and then decide whether it's a hit on your P&L.
But at the end of the year, would you like it to be at least profitable at a store level for you to continue with the store?
I'll tell you one thing. For me, most of my stores are profitable. But there are some stores, tail end of my stores, which are loss-making. Maybe they lose 50,000-60,000 rupees a month. That's a kind of loss of a store which my P&L can absorb. So everyone should have their threshold in the mind. You look up to a particular amount per month, they're willing to bear. That store you can go even beyond a year for it to break in. But there are some stores where the loss is so heavy, you have to cut down on the loss. So there's no sentimental value. If you feel a store is not working out, you give it a year's time. If it's not worked out, exit.
Got it.
Now, the threshold of what is going to be the barometer of loss will vary from person to person. When during the kiosk days, 50,000 rupees a month of loss in an outlet was huge for me. So I would take a call. For a slightly matured company, maybe 80,000, 90,000 rupees is not a big value. So it comes down to the size of the business, how much you're willing to bear for that particular outlet. Because at the end of the day, that store itself is marketing for you. So if that store is at 30,000-40,000 rupees of negative EBITDA a month, it's not a problem because the store is doing marketing for you by having a storefront.
No, that is true. A lot of brands do sort of take that lens when it comes to EBOs as well. And in your experience, what's the, for Go Colors again, what's the typical ramp up phase to get to steady state, after which the growth is inflationary at a store level?
You're saying from a same store sales growth perspective?
Yeah.
See, we are, even after so many years, we are seeing healthy same-store sales growth even for our vintage stores. So it depends on the category. So some categories are very virgin. So you'll have tailwinds of same-store sales growth even going in your 5th year, 6th year, 7th year. There are some matured categories where you reach maturity very fast. But if I have to draw a line and take an average conclusion, I guess maybe I think 4 years, 5 years, the store reaches some sort of maturity where it comes down to single-digit same-store sales growth. And from there, inflation takes the gear.
Right. And again, on an average basis, what would be like year 5 revenues versus year 1 for a store? Again, averages, talking averages here.
See, in terms of absolute terms, you will probably in your year 1, year 2 do about 40-50% of what you'll do in your year 5.
Okay, so it doubles essentially.
It doubles essentially.
Over 5 years. And after single digit, fair enough.
And then it goes.
That's what I was trying to get it. Got it. Now moving to the next biggest channel for Go Colors, which is LFS. And it's a channel that, that a lot of brands dread. And I don't know of many brands that have made money in that channel, but it's worked beautifully for you. So brands to think about LFS as a channel and how to strategize for that channel.
I think it's a fantastic channel to be part of. Slightly heavy on the working capital side, but ROC is good even after having heavy working capital days. For the kind of profitability you can earn in LFS, still your ROC is pretty decent. So see, in an LFS, effectively your ROC is your return on working capital because there's no capex.
Yeah.
So effectively, if your return on working capital is good and your profitability is good, even slightly higher working capital days is not a problem. in an LFS. So LFS is an excellent channel to be part of if you get the space provided. And you can scale to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 very fast. You can go to tier 3, tier 4, get exposed to new customers before you've decided to open your EBO. So theoretically, today an LFS gives you the platform to enter newer cities where you're not able to enter. So LFS is an excellent channel to be part of, and it should at any point of time in any business be ranging between 20 to 50% of the business. Now, in our business, where we have built a solid direct-to-consumer business, LFS is about 21-22% of the business. Another business where general trade is of prime importance, LFS would be 30-40% of the business. So, in any model, like I told you, right, for every brand, the recipe would be different. The one thing which should be there is LFS should be at least 20-30% of the business minimum, because it's an excellent marketing channel. It gives you entry into newer towns. It gives you exposure to new customers, which you might not get through your EBO or online or GT. So the placement in an LFS is very, and from a commercial sense, it definitely makes commercial sense.
And, LFS is a channel, and I've been part of a few brand journeys where we've just seen it as a marketing channel primarily because it's been really hard to make money. Are there any best practices that you followed in Go Colors for LFS, that you think a lot of brands are probably missing out on?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. Never be shy to do a commercial discussion with an LFS. So at the end of the day, when you're signing up with an LFS as a new brand, if it is not commercially viable, be very clear with the LFS on day one. Because once you freeze a margin with an LFS, you can never ever commercially renegotiate with them. So my tip of advice to everyone is that, look, don't be penny wise pound foolish by letting an LFS go, by trying to negotiate too much. But at the end of the day, don't be in a situation where you're giving away all the margins and you don't know nothing. So be very clear. Don't be one extreme where you're trying to negotiate too hard for the last penny, but don't overdo it to the extent where where it's not commercially viable for you. Because I'm telling you from experience, if you start business with an LFS on certain commercial negotiated terms, you can never change those negotiated terms later. So
that's interesting.
So maintaining the balance when you're discussing with an LFS is very important. Should not go either extreme.
Right. And I missed out on one thing regarding stores. When we met, you'd spoken about an interesting metric, which was customer repeats at a store level and how that's a leading indicator of a store performance.
So,
do you want to?
Yeah, I want to touch upon that.
Talk through that.
I missed that point. So I think, look, in an EBO, if the customer frequency in an EBO is low, if the engagement with the product is less in a year, an EBO will never work. Because today, if you want to draw a customer's wallet share and do get sales per square feet, customer frequency to the store has to be high, which is very, very important. So in our product, frequency is very high. Today, a lady, when she's buying a bottom, she's buying a legging, she's coming back for another product very soon again. So the repeat purchase at a store level, the engagement of a customer at a store level should be frequent. If that is not there, you will never be able to achieve sales per square feet. And if you're not able to achieve sales per square feet, you can't get EBITDA.
No, that's very interesting. And what is it today for Go? What is it today at Go Colors, again, at an average level? How often does a customer come back to a store and make a purchase?
You should at least get a customer back to the store at least 5 times a year.
No, that is phenomenal. A customer purchasing
or if
5 times a year from the store.
Back 4 to 5 times a year, you need to sell a lot more to the customer in that one instance.
Right.
Basically, you have to get enough of the wallet of that customer in the year. Now, whether you do 2 times a year, or whether you do 4 times. So the average transaction value and the number of times a customer comes back, both things are very important.
Yeah. And it also highlights the importance of data tracking customers even in the offline channel at a store level. Yeah. Perfect. And now let's zoom out and go back to your journey from inception to listing. I think the total capital consumed by the business was not more than 100 crores to get to 400 crores when you listed.
No.
And
We had close to 165 crores of capital invested. So as promoters, we put in a seed. Sequoia had put in 60 crores. We had about 100 crores invested by ICICI Venture. So I think when we got listed, we had about 50 crores of cash in the balance sheet, unutilized.
Correct.
So
Correct.
yeah, roughly you can say about 100 crores of cash invested in the business.
Exactly. So that was my point.
Yeah.
Correct. So 100 crores consumed to get to 400 crores and you were profitable. And if you were to distill, the top three reasons that help you get there, because this is an important metric that we care about at DSG. We call it capital efficiency, which is the capital infused versus the revenues achieved. And yours is at a 4x, which is phenomenal. It's sort of our take on return on capital employed for early stage brands. So what would you attribute that to if you were to distill just the top three reasons that help you?
I'll tell you one thing. This is a balance sheet business, not a P&L business. P&L has its importance. So today, when we talk about capital employed and we remove the cash element out of it and we look at actual capital employed, it's your working capital. So today, for any business, keeping an eye on your working capital days. See, in your early years, working capital of the business will be elongated because you're building for growth. You will have higher inventory in your initial years because you're growing that much faster. At some point of time in the journey, your inventory days have to be under control. And if your inventory days are going to be in your control, that much capital is freed up. So in a company, margins, how much profitability you're generating from an EBITDA to PAT perspective and your working capital days perspective, if you're able to keep a balance of the two, you'll always build a very capital efficient business. So A, good margins in the business coming down from gross margins, and B, having very, very good turns, working capital turns in a year so that your capital is freed. That's how you build a business where you're able to 4x your capital. So we concentrated on efficient working capital days and we concentrated on building a business around good, strong fundamental margins, right? From good gross margins of higher than 60%, flowing down to PAT margins of 13-14%. And we were able to convert those PAT margins into operating cash flow because we had controlled working capital days in our business.
And the third reason, if I may add, is your marketing efficiency. 5 crores of brand spends when you were at a 400 crore top line. There are many younger brands that spend.
I'll tell you, see, again, that recipe is very different for everyone. And I'll tell you why. In our case, we were able to pull off with very low marketing spends because our EBO were our front-facing advertising tool. So we had 14 to 15% of our rent to company sales ratio where we were spending on rent. For a non-EBO business, you'll have to probably spend 10% of your revenue on marketing because you don't have an EBO storefront. So spending 10% on advertising is not necessarily a bad thing. The real point is that the eventual margins, what you're able to deliver below EBITDA, that whether you're spending advertising 10% or spending on rent 14%, that eventual profitability has to come. For me, I was able to spend 14% on rent and 3% on marketing. It worked for me. For another business, they'll have to spend 10% on marketing. So, like I said, the recipe, the structure would be very different for everyone.
Absolutely. But the most important thing is you're thinking of rent as part of your marketing spend, right? And you're clubbing that and seeing that as a 15 to 20% pool that you're using for marketing. I think that's the nuance, which is super important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, look, people, I don't know whether this is the right thing to say. You should never look at EBITDA before advertising spends. People think of capitalizing advertising spends and saying, look, this is for building the brand. We will look at EBITDA before advertising. That's not the right way of looking at it. Advertising is an expense in the P&L. It is not a capital item. So you have to look at EBITDA post advertising. Many digital first companies get carried away saying that, look, before advertising, we are EBITDA positive. it is
Right.
always EBITDA is after advertising expense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
And I must clarify. Yeah, and I must clarify one thing, which is on the EBITDA margin of the business itself, which is reported at 30%. I think this doesn't include the store level rentals,
yes,
right?
correct.
As per
So
Ind
for us,
AS.
unfortunately, because of Ind AS 116, which is an accounting standard, we have to capitalize rent. So the 30% what we're delivering at the company level, what we're reporting is before rent, because we have to capitalize rent. So our EBITDA, what we are generating at a company level after rent is 20%.
Right. Right. I just thought it was important to clarify that to the audience.
EBITDA still is for us above 25, because there we take rent as an expense.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. That helps. Now, coming back to marketing. So since you operate this one's on a lighter note, you operate at sub 4-5% marketing spends. How do you keep your marketing team motivated, with such low budgets? How do you think of motivating them and driving them hard?
See, I'll tell you, I've been blessed with a very good marketing team, and I think they look at the business for what the importance of the business is, because we are a EBO business. But having said that, 4-5% on today's scale is a decent amount of marketing budget a year, which we have a very strong marketing team, and they spend it very efficiently on social media, influencers, and other aspects of digital. I think in the early years, when we were very frugal on frugal on marketing spends, because 3% of a 50 crore business is nothing, absolutely nothing in terms of spends. So I think that at that point of time, we had some challenges. I think today, because we've become a 600 plus crore brand, 3% even on 600 crores or 4% even on 600 crores is a decent amount of budget a year which we spend on brand building. So today we have a very good, strong marketing team, and we are able to make efficient use of that. But in the early years, yes, I mean, it is a very small amount to spend.
Yeah. and how do you manage such less discounting? Less than 3% of your revenues is discounted, and if you go to a mall and look at stores, everyone's to acquire a customer in an EBO model. So how did you manage to fight that urge and achieve what you have?
See, I think, look, we have a core functional product, and core functional products are usually sold on full price because our inventory does not go out of fashion. It goes year after year without getting discontinued. So there's no need for us to discount. Let me put it that way. See, our average selling price is less than 1,000. So the prices begin with quite sharp in nature. The product and inventory is core. So there's no real need for us to discount. And because we are in the core category and we are not discounting, automatically that benefit is flowing to the gross margins and then to the brand. It's because of the category we are.
Which means, are you saying that that's the case with competition as well? As a category, there's a category where there's no discounting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, even for competition, because we are in such a category, there's no real need for them to discount. Okay, they might discount it anyways to acquire the customer, which is a different strategy altogether. But in our case, we never felt the need, because ours is a low unit item, low ticket item. It's less than 1,000. And there's no real need for discounting because it's a core category. If I was in a category where we have the fashion element, where styles go out of fashion, then of course to liquidate inventory and free up balance sheet, I'll have to do that. But in ours, there's no real need.
Right. That's interesting. And the other interesting aspect about the business, as we were going through your annual report, was the emphasis on technology and how that helped you as you rolled out 50, 100 stores a year, etc. So could you talk more on that, on how you've been using technology as you scale?
See, I think, look, technology is very important, and it comes back to the question. I keep coming back to inventory always, because that's the real crux of the business, right? Today, technology, AI, business analytics, they actually tell you what to keep where. he has relatively smaller stores, right? So knowing what in such a small store to what SKU and what quantity per square feet, all that you need an analytics tool. Without an analytics tool, you cannot really optimize or keep the right inventory at the right. So I'll give you an example. If today you open the most prime looking store in the most prime area, but if you get your ratios right of colors and products, customer will not find what she needs. So that analytics tells you based on past behavior of sales, what you should be keeping there. And that is what analytics helps you, is your stocking. One line, it helps you in your stocking, and that stocking gets you the sale. It's not possibly manually possible for one person to figure out the stocking across 1,000 stores in the country. It's not possible. You need an AI tool telling you that. So it's very, very important for companies at an early on stage in their life to have a very strong ERP in place. As you get bigger, it is that much more difficult to implement an ERP. So when you're smaller and you have a big vision of your business, do the implementation at that point.
What will be the right stage for that? And I think you use SAP, right?
Yeah, we use SAP. See, there's no right stage. It's about when you can afford an ERP. Today, SAP is quite expensive because you have a initial capital cost, then you have to keep investing year on year. There's a running cost. If your budgets allow you, rather than spending on unnecessary advertising money, it's better to get that fundamental thing placed in your business right from day one. Because when the company is small, implementing a ERP is fairly simple. As the business grows, it becomes that much more difficult. So if you can afford it, do it on day one. Right. It depends when you want to do it. And sometimes you have to take that hard call of saying, look, I need to do it today.
Yeah. So I think, the takeaway is that it's better done sooner than later, and obviously affordability
the timing depends on how much capital is available for you and how much you're willing to spend. But the faster, the sooner, the better. 100%.
Yeah. And I think the other headline message is just the focus on inventory and managing inventory.
This is, I'll tell you one thing, this is a working capital, inventory, operating cash flow business. This is not a P&L business by any means. In early days, yes, you can overlook it because you're growing. But once you reach some sort of maturity, this is an operating cash flow business. 100%.
Couldn't agree more. Now, moving to just the sharpness of focus in terms of category. You're now touching 1,000 crores, but you've chosen to stay focused on bottom wear and not, get into women's bottom wear, more specifically, not get into men's bottom wear, top wear, inner wear, etc. So could you talk more on the thought process?
See, frankly, I think, look, we feel that the growth in this category the runway is huge. And last 10 years, we haven't digressed, and I don't see ourselves digressing for the next 7-8 years. Now, I'll tell you why. Because look, if you're in a particular category where you're able to grow more than 20-30% every year, there's no need for you to look at adjacencies. And I think we've not reached that time where we have exhausted the bottom wear category. So see, today a brand is a unique identity, right? And the customer sees you and they perceive you in a way before buying your products. Today, the minute you start extending into different categories, you're trying to confuse the customer. Your identity is very important. So it's good to go in adjacencies, but you should go in those adjacencies only when you see that you've exhausted your current category. As long as you can grow at 20-30% every year on year and the market is big, there's no need for anyone to go into other adjacencies. And we've not done it. We've kept life very simple. We've kept doing the same thing for the last 10 years, and I don't see ourselves doing anything different in the next 10 years as well. When we're having the growth, why to complicate?
No, I love that focus on keeping it simple and that 20-30% growth, right? But I think the main question that's relevant for the audience is why are you aspiring for 20-30% 30% growth and not higher?
I'm talking
I think it's important you answer that for that.
So look, I'm talking about a long-term CAGR, right? I'm not saying that, look, in the initial years, the business would throw up 50, 60% kind of growth rates. In a long-term CAGR, if you're able to do it, you should do one thing, but get that thing right. Because please understand, the customer identifies you for a particular reason. It's not necessary that you will go into adjacencies and the customer will buy you because she has bought you for something else. It's not necessary. And that can be a big failure point. Today, because I'm selling bottoms, I think, okay, look, customer is acquired, let me sell tops. Customer might not come and buy my top. So you can't let...
No, that's a very important point.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, it's good to get into that line of adjacencies, but you have to then see certain kind of hurdles in your current category. When you reach some sort of stage where you feel, look, you've done a lot and you've achieved a good market share and your growth rates are going to be tight, then look at the adjacencies. Better to be known for one big thing rather than doing 5 small things and diluting yourself. It's always better to grow vertically than grow horizontally.
Yeah. No, that's a very important message that that I wanted to underline for the audience as well. And as you said, we've also seen how entering unrelated categories, etc., only increases the failure rate. And just standing for one thing, having a crystal clear identity, just maximizes your chances of success.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now focusing on defensibilities and capabilities that you've built at Go Colors, would like to understand how you think of the core capabilities that Go Colors has built as an organization over the years. If you can just talk us through how you think about building defensibilities for the business at different stages of growth.
I think, look, we as a business, we have kept things very simple. And I think our fundamental thesis is that we have spent more time on things that work for us. So we know those 3-4 things that work very well for us. And 90% of our time at Go Colors and all the people working for Go Colors spend on that. Mm-hmm. I think in an organization, sometimes you get carried away or you start spending time on things which don't really add too much value in your business. So Go Colors, all team members have actually spent time on things that matter. Now, things that matter could change from person to person, from business to business. In our business, we know, okay, look, product, EBO. These are the two most, and third is supply chain. Our time spent goes in buckets. Everything else is noise for us, apart from that. So you have to prioritize your buckets and spend time where it matters. And I think we as an organization and management are more on that basis. We think on that basis than anything else. See, I've also seen the times of 2014, 2015 when we did so many other things and we were not getting the result. Mm-hmm. That is a discovery period. Once you discover what works for you, then you have to narrow down your focus. So there will be a time in any business where you will be doing 10 other things to figure out what works. Like I was coming back to my discussion right at the beginning. Like you have to do general trade, you have to do LFS, you have to do EBO, you have to do everything. Then you know what works for you. And then you have to put your head down and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
So to summarize, in terms of defensibilities, what I heard you say was product capabilities, running a distributed EBO operation, and supply chain. Is that accurate?
These 3 things. Of course, each vertical is as complicated as the other. It's an issue in itself, but focusing on these 3 things.
Right. And did you ever consider complete backward integration, etc., in terms of manufacturing?
See, I'll tell you one thing. We have been into manufacturing earlier, and I know how tough that business is. If a product can be simplified and outsourced, there's no need for you to put up your own manufacturing, especially in garments. Because if you want to grow at 30-40% every year, your own manufacturing will be a backlog and a bottleneck. So you have to be in a growing business like that. If you're able to outsource, it's always better to outsource than manufacture. and we've seen the manufacturing side of it. So in Go Colors, we are never going to manufacture. To what I believe, we're not going to manufacture. We're always going to be an outsource. Because today, this business flows everything from gross margins, right? If you don't have gross margins in the business, the P&L is not going to ever deliver profitability to you. Gross margins are possible only if you work with the best supplier at the lowest rate. If I have my own manufacturing, I will be bound by my own manufacturing costs. I should have the flexibility of going to a different supplier who gives me the same quality or better quality at a lower price. So the nature of the business is gross margin. So if you want to have high gross margin business, you have to be in the outsourcing.
So when you talk about product capabilities, just double clicking on that as a core defensibility for Go Colors, what would be like the 2-3 elements that are most important in terms of product capabilities for Go Colors?
See, for us, everything what we make from a product perspective is what the customer wants. For us, at the end of the day, the customer is king. The customer expects a product of a certain quality and at a certain price. And we work only on that one. So today, as a brand, you need to know who your customer is, at what price the customer is going to buy, what is your TG. Everything flows from what the customer wants. So today, whatever range we have built and whatever pricing we do, everything is keeping in mind what the customer is comfortable spending for what quality. So today, whatever product development we did, whether we've done it across Western wear, ethnic wear, fusion wear, it's all on customer research.
I think we have a few customer questions. One last question from me, Gautam. So for those listening in, if they aspire to become the next Gautam Saraogi, what are like the 2-3 personality traits that you think really helped you in your journey?
Well, look, I'm not really a role model for anyone. Even I'm growing. I have many role models to follow. But I think, look, very important is to go with your own gut. And I'll tell you one thing, what we did very well. When we did the EBO business, everyone were running behind e-com, GT, and I was going a different way altogether. Like I told, for everyone, the source of truth or the recipe is different. So it's because something worked for me does not mean it will work for someone else, and because something worked for someone else will not work for me, right? So it's always very important to go with your own entrepreneurial instinct of what is right for your business. So I think that has helped me personally a lot.
No, that is interesting.
When we grew EBOs, no one were even looking at the EBO segment. Everyone was thinking online GT, and we were focusing on something completely different where people thought, why are these guys opening their own stores? Who's going to go and buy? So, and I didn't know whether it will work or not work. I went with my instinct, right? So you have to go with your instinct.
Yeah, trust your instinct and don't follow the herd. Moving on to the audience questions. The first one is relevant. This is on whether your preference is for franchise-owned stores or company-owned stores, and your thought process behind that.
Well, look, it's a function of your EBO economics. If your ROC and margins in your EBO business are good, there's no need to franchise. Or if you feel you're not having the capital, even if your economics are good and you're not having the capital to put up to open a store, maybe you can look to franchise. So it's all depends on your economics of where you are. We are not against franchising. We franchise. So today, out of the 655 stores, we have over 13-14 franchises here. So 99% of our stores are company and company operated. But maybe tomorrow, when we have 1,500 stores, maybe our franchise stores would be about 10%. Because we would probably franchise in towns where I will not be able to control my store. I think that should be the reason of franchise. I think wherever you're able to efficiently manage your stores, your economics are good and capital is available, you should look to open a company-owned, company-operated store in any location where you managing the store efficiently is the challenge, you can even think about franchising. There's no.
Got it. The next one is on for a new brand looking at EBOs or kiosks. Would you suggest a mall or a high street in terms of the location?
Definitely a mall, for sure, because a mall has footfalls already defined, because there are footfalls happening in the mall. Of course, opening in the right location in the mall is very important. In retail, you might be part of the best mall, but if you don't have the right location, nothing will happen. So if you're getting an opportunity, you should first start with the mall and then go with the high street. But does not mean that first high street will not work. If you definitely have to open, you're not getting a space in the mall and you're bullish about high street, go for the high street, it might work. But a mall is usually better starting step than a high street.
No, I agree. And you also mentioned how a kiosk is a great stepping stone before opening an EBO, right? So would you suggest brands to start with a kiosk before?
See, Hari, it depends on the range of products you have. I had only 2 products when I started in the kiosk, so it worked for me. If you have a decently wide range of SKUs, where there's a visual merchandising element to it, where there has to be an experience for a customer to walk into the store, you should go for the store. It depends on the product. It is very, very subjective to the product. If you feel that from a VM perspective, you can pull off in the kiosk, try with the kiosk. But if from a VM perspective and shopping experience perspective, the behavior happens in a store, then you should try for the store. It is very, very subjective.
And when did you... No, I think the point on VM and assortment is an important one. So at what threshold did you decide that EBOs made more sense from an assortment standpoint?
See, because when we started adding products, the customer needed a trial room. They needed a trial room which we didn't have. Right? So today, we had no choice but to try a store with a trial room. Because for the leggings and churis, they don't need a trial room. But for the other value-added products, they did. So when we kept adding those product ranges, then we suddenly realized that the sales started stagnating. It was not growing. Our new products were not selling. That's when we knew, okay, we had to try a store over a kiosk.
Got it. I think the other question is on the top two, 3 parameters that one needs to consider in selecting an EBO location.
See, I think, look, it's always better to pay a little extra rent, but take a prime location over taking a B category or C category location. Many people have that policy saying that, look, we'll take a store of a little lower rent, we'll do a little extra marketing, and we'll make the store work. It should be the other way around. A store by its nature should generate revenue for itself without marketing. So you have to get the location right. Even paying a little bit of premium rental doesn't matter. You have to take the prime location. Now, how do you go about taking the prime location? That is something where you have to study who's your TG and which brands you follow. There are certain brands we follow, we try opening near them. There are certain brands following us who try opening next to us. So it's basically a chain. So you have to make your benchmark on certain brands you would like to follow and then try opening stores next to them. And if those are prime locations, the EBO will do its work by itself. But the concept of doing higher marketing and spending less on rent is a bad concept. It's a wrong concept. It should be the other way around. If a store is of a right location, it does not need marketing dollars for it to do well. Unless your product is not good. If your product is good and you're in the right location, the sales will happen. You don't have to spend on marketing.
And so this is obviously subject to that 15% rent to revenue threshold.
No, Hari, the 15% is again subjective, depends on how large your gross margins are.
Right.
Sometimes a business have 80% gross margins. Their affordability of rent to revenue can be higher. So today, for any business or brand, they need to first put down on paper saying that, okay, hey, this is my gross margin, this is my OPEX. What is my rent to revenue budget? I might be looking at 15%. Some other person can afford even 30%.
No, that
I
is
think
fair.
that calculation is very good.
That is fair. And just, two final questions to round up, Gautam. For Go Colors, how do you think about marketing at a store level in terms of revenues? Is it, the 5%, how does that break down at a store level, store level activations, etc.?
See, for us, our marketing of 4-5%, 4%, 3-4% what we spend is for brand building, and largely we spend on digital.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are two types of advertising, right? There's online advertising and there is offline advertising. Keeping ATL, BTL aside, there's offline advertising,
Mm-hmm.
online advertising. Our offline advertising is our stores. So whatever incrementally we spend over and above rent, the 3-4%, we spend it digitally, where we don't have a store. So for us, the little bit marketing spends we have, we spend it on brand building, top of the funnel brand building, and we spend it in the online world, which works very well for us.
Got it. And the last question, since you track customer data very closely, an interesting metric would be, we spoke about the revenue ratio between the first 2 years versus fifth year. Similarly, would you have a sense on the number of customers transacting at a store? How does that change from the first 2 year versus fifth year when the store hits steady state?
See, I think from customer level, things remain constant. It's just that your store starts flattening in terms of revenue. And that's when you need to be very, very careful. So your starting years, your same store sales growth will be very good. And eventually your same store sales growth will start to flatten out a little bit. So the important thing here is that today, when you're growing in clusters, rather than looking at each store individually at a same store sales growth, you look at the cluster and saying, hey, look, hey, this is my cluster, this micro area. I've added so many stores. My increase in revenue, whether it is correlated in line with my increase in cost. At a cluster level, if you're growing well and your margins are remaining the same, then same store sales growth flattening shouldn't be a concern. Because in any business, it is inevitable that the same store sales growth will start flattening.
Correct.
So then the data of clusters come, which we call same cluster sales. What is a cluster?
Right.
You take one micro area, you're having more number of stores. So instead of looking the stores individually, you look at that one cluster as one store.
Right. But for, given a lot of the audience is younger brands, so the first, what I heard you say is the number of customers transacting is roughly the same, over the store's lifetime. And then, so it's essentially customers, transacting 2x their initial transaction value in the first year as the store matures.
Is that you need to know what is your average bill basket. Is your average bill basket year on year stagnant or is growing or degrowing? Customer footfalls at a store you cannot control because that is dependent on the outside scenario of recession or how the economy is doing. But the customers who are walking in, are they buying the same quantity average per bill? That is something which is a very, very important number to track. If you're able to grow that decimal, and I say decimal because if suppose it's 2.4 garments, a bill, example, I'm just giving you, to make that 2.5 is very difficult. Whether the 2.4 is downward or is going upward, that is very important. Because footfalls as a brand you cannot control. The one thing you can control is the customer who's walking into the store. How much is that customer transacting?
Perfect. No, we've overshot time, but this was fantastic, God. I think great 101 on just focus and especially, on cracking the retail channel. So really appreciate you joining us this evening. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a good weekend. Thanks everyone for joining.